Good morning. My name is Bob Crawford. Today is December the 11th, 2019. As a part of the Knoxville Bar Association Legal History Project, I have the pleasure to interview my friend and former law partner, Greg O'Connor. Greg, for purposes of the interview, tell us your full name, when you were born, and where you were born.
My name is James Gregory O'Connor. I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee on January 6, 1941.
Tell us about your family, that is, your parents, what they did, and your siblings.
Okay. My parents were Joe and Vivian O'Connor. They're both Knoxvillians. My mother was a homemaker and a housewife, and my dad worked for the state of Tennessee Department of Employment Security. He was an appeals referee for unemployment compensation cases. So as cases were appealed, he listened to those cases and ruled on unemployment compensation. I have an older brother. Unfortunately, he passed away this year. He was 2 years older than me. I have a younger sister, Mary Frances Gallagher, that lives here in Knoxville.
What part of town did you grow up in?
I grew up in East Knoxville, what they call Park City. That's close to Chilhowie Park.
You have two children, Brian and Stephen. Talk about them.
Okay. Brian and Stephen, obviously I'm very proud of them. Brian lives in Knoxville. He went to the University of Miami in Ohio. After he finished, one interesting thing he did, he hiked the entire Appalachian Trail. So that was a great trip for him. And then he took a job with Jupiter Entertainment, which is a local company here in town that writes and produces television programs. So he's done that. He's currently an editor for them. He surprised me about 5 or 6 years ago when he decided he wanted to go to law school. So he went to the University of Louisville Law School, graduated from there. He is a licensed attorney in the state of Tennessee. He's practiced a little bit, but not much. He's still with Jupiter. Stephen went to the University of Tennessee, and he is a psychologist, and he just finished working with the University of Louisville Medical Center as a member of their staff, and he currently is working for the National Institute of Mental Health in the Washington, D.C. area.
Did you encourage either of your sons to become a lawyer?
I didn't encourage either one of them to do that. By the same token, I didn't discourage them to do it. I wanted them to do what they wanted to do. And I guess the only advice that I gave them is that when they decide to do something, be sure and do something that is meaningful to you and that you're excited about.
Where did you get your early education?
I went to Catholic schools my whole life, grades 1 through 12, and so there was a grade school here in downtown Knoxville called St. Mary's that was grades 1 through 8, and I went there with so many of my friends that are still my friends today. From there we went to Catholic High School, which was out on Magnolia Avenue, and I graduated out there in 1959.
How did that Catholic school education influence Greg O'Connor?
Well, in many ways, one, I made a lot of friends that have been friends my whole life and are still friends. The education was very good. It was a small school, so we all knew each other. We were like brothers and sisters, quite frankly. And it shaped my religious life also.
Were you involved in any particular activities in high school and in the summers?
I always loved sports, so I played on the basketball team, I played on the baseball team, and I played on the golf team at Catholic High. I was the sports editor of our school newspaper, and just involved in different other things in high school.
Now, you graduated from the University of Tennessee here in Knoxville. Did you go directly from Catholic high school to UT?
No, while I was in high school, I thought that I had a vocation to be a Catholic priest. and thought about it long and hard. And so after I graduated, I went to the seminary. In fact, there were 4 or 5 other guys in my class that went also. So we went to a small seminary up in Kentucky called St. Mary's College, and I stayed there for 2 years. In the first 2 years of education toward being a Catholic priest. But after 2 years, I decided that I did not have a vocation, and so I dropped out of the seminary and took a year off trying to decide. I was really on a leave of absence trying to decide whether I was going to go back to the seminary or move in a different direction. And during that year, I decided that I was not going back, and so I chose to go to the University of Tennessee.
What did you major in at UT?
I majored in political science and history.
Tell us some of your favorite memories of UT undergraduate school.
Well, the first thing that kind of was different in my story is that even though I had gone to a good school at the seminary, and we took mostly liberal arts courses, some religion courses, but primarily general liberal arts, the University of Tennessee did not recognize St. Mary's as an accredited school, and so I had to start over at UT. So I was a freshman and sophomore 2 times. In many cases, taking the same courses over and over again using the same textbooks. So I did a little bit better the second time around. But it didn't bother me that I didn't get credit for those 2 years. It was something I needed to do, something I wanted to do, and I wouldn't take anything for my 2 years at the seminary. But going back to UT, you know, I never had been to a large university before. I'd always been in small, and so UT was a big institution. And so I wanted to take advantage of everything that UT had to offer, so I joined a fraternity, and I was active in the fraternity for 3 years. I became active in a number of things on campus, Student Government Association and Carnicus and some organizations like that, and made a lot of new friends from all over the place, and both in and out of my fraternity and on campus, and had a great experience.
Did you work while you were in college?
I did. I worked my way through college, and I worked at the courthouse. I worked in the trustee's office, which was the tax collector's office. I actually started 1 year before I started at UT, and I continued to hold that job from that time until I graduated from law school in 1968. So I worked at the trustee's office for 7 years.
What made you decide to go to law school?
When I was at the courthouse, for the first time in my life, I was kind of thrown into the legal world. All the courts were in that building at that time. Lawyers were coming in and out of our office. I would go into the courts from time to time, and so that introduced me to the legal world, and I think this is the direction I would like to try.
Okay, let's talk about law school. Where did you go and when?
I went to UT Law School. At that time, UT had a 3-3 program, which meant after you finished 3 years of undergraduate school, you could start law school, and then after 1 year of law school, that was the equivalent of your 4th year in undergraduate. So I chose to do that. By that time, I'd already been 2 years in the seminary, and I'd been 3 years at UT. And rather than finish my 4th year in undergraduate school, I decided I would move on to law school. So I started in law school in 1965, and I finished in 1968.
What was law school like at that time?
It was small, only a handful of girls that were there at that time, whereas today, I understand that 50% or more are women at this point. But many of the students there were people that I knew from undergraduate school, and of course others weren't. It had lots of good professors. Law school was it was a real challenge for me, because for the first time I was introduced to I took liberal arts courses when I was in undergraduate school. I didn't take any business courses, so I got to law school, and all of a sudden I was looking at corporations, and I was looking at tax law, and I was looking at things that were foreign to me. So I was kind of having to learn a lot of new subjects that were very interesting, but something very different. But law school was a great experience.
Did you continue to work at the courthouse while you were in law school?
I did.
Where did you live during law school?
The first year I lived in the Fort Sanders area with a couple of friends, and then I moved out on Kingston Pike out in the Bearden area for the last 2 years, and I had 2 roommates out there in an apartment. They were both law students, and that's where I lived until I graduated.
You had a little interesting experience between law school graduation and the bar exam. Talk about that.
I did. Well, I was always fascinated by other cultures in the world and always wanted to travel. Always had just kind of an urge to get out and see the world. And so when I graduated from law school, at that time I was 27 years old because of all these things that had happened before, a little bit older than some of the other guys. But I said, this is the time I want to do something a little bit different. So I ended up going to Europe.
Was that before the bar exam?
That was before the bar exam. So I graduated in March, and the bar exam wasn't offered until July. And I said, well, this would be a good time just to go to Europe and bum around over there and see Europe and enjoy that for about 3 months or something like that, and then come back and take the bar exam. But what happened is that I got over there and I was fascinated by everything that I was seeing and hearing about. I was bumping into all kinds of other people that were traveling all over the world, and they were telling me about other places that if I was interested in other cultures and other countries, I ought to consider them. And so I said, okay, I'm going to extend this trip. And so I ended up traveling around Europe, and then I ended up going east is where I went. And so, for example, I went out to, I stayed in Israel for a while. I worked on a kibbutz there and did some other work. And then I came back to Istanbul, and I started going overland from Turkey into Iran, into Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Ceylon, Thailand, and then I ended up in Japan. And I ran out of money in Thailand, so that's halfway around the world with about $40 in my pocket. So, but what was great is when you're out on the road, you bump into all these fellow travelers that will tell you, where you can stay cheaply, where you can eat cheaply, and if you run out of money and need to work, what the kind of part-time jobs are. And so I took a part-time job in Thailand to earn enough money to get a boat ticket to Japan. And when I got to Japan, the popular thing for people in the United States and other Westerners was to teach English conversation to Japanese businessmen. And I did that for 1.5 years. So to make a long story short, that what I thought was going to be about a 3-month trip turned into almost a 3-year trip. And of course, my recollection of what I'd learned in law school was fading away. And so when I got back, I had to work hard to kind of
How did that experience make you who you are today?
It's one of the greatest things I ever did. It is. It really shaped me in so many ways about the way I look at the world and the way that I look at other people, because it exposed me to people of different races, cultures, religions, and I saw all of those people. And my travel was with the people. It was not anything high end. I stayed in the cheapest places, eating the cheapest food. To kind of give you an idea, I lived for 1.5 years on $1,200 until I ran out of money. And so that's the way I was living. And so that made me, the way I was traveling and being around, I was around the people of all these different countries. And in all of those years, I did not have any threats. I didn't have any assaults. I didn't have anything of a negative nature happen to me when I was around all of those people. And that made such an impression on me about how good, I'm not naive. I know there's plenty of bad in the world, but there's just more good, a lot more good. And all those people, of all these different types of people, just kind of shaped me to think how I think about other people and other people of other countries and religions and so forth. I just, we're all the same, quite frankly.
Did you consider practicing law anywhere other than Knoxville?
I thought about maybe taking a job with a legal aid clinic someplace like in Memphis, but not much, and I decided I would just start in Knoxville.
You came back, took the bar.
Excuse me.
When were you licensed?
1971.
How did you know what direction you wanted to go as far as your career?
Well, when I think back to law school, what I was really interested in doing was criminal defense work. I really saw myself as a criminal defense lawyer for the rest of my career. Those are the courses that I really loved. Those are the ones that meant something to me. Those were the ones that I felt like that's the direction I would like to go. And so when I came back, when I passed the bar exam, then after the bar exam, then I interviewed a couple of firms. And I was not hired by either firm. And so I've got kind of a funny story. One very prominent lawyer with a firm, he was interviewing me for the job, and he said, so you've been traveling for 3 years, just had the wanderlust. He said, Greg, he said, if you had a pregnant wife and a big mortgage on a home that would make you stay here in Knoxville, we might consider hiring you. But for all we know, you'll work for us for 3 months and you'll be gone around the world again. And so we're just not going to take a chance with you. And so I still laugh about that to this day. The good thing is that I was single. I was 31 years old at this point. I was single. I'd been living on next to nothing for years. So I just found an inexpensive apartment in downtown and I lived there. I decided, well, I'm going to start on my own. My cousin, John T. O'Connor, he was in practice with Bob Child, so it was Child, O'Connor, Ellis, and Petty at that time. And they had an empty office. And my cousin, John, said, Greg, Bill Petty's going to be out on leave of absence for about 5 more months. If you want to sit in his office, you're welcome to do that. We won't charge you anything. You have use of our secretaries and libraries and copy machines and telephones and all of that. I'm not a member of the firm. They're just letting me set up my individual practice there. And so that's where I started. And so I can't thank John O'Connor and Bob Child enough for giving me that gift early on to get me going. And they gave me a few little cases, and Bill Petty came back, and coincidentally, there was an office open right next to their office, and I took it, but still using all of their facilities, and that gift continued. And I didn't have any business, and so I wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer, and so the first thing I did, I went down to criminal court and I got on the court appointed list. This was before we had a public defender. And so the court would appoint lawyers to handle certain types of cases, and so that's kind of the way I started with court-appointed cases in criminal court. What was different, though, back in those days is that unlike today, before you can handle a real serious case, you have to have a lot of experience. Back in those days, the judges, the criminal judges, would appoint someone with a limited amount of experience to handle some serious cases. So here I am with no experience, no one to teach me anything. And a couple of years into my practice, I'm being assigned to handle first-degree murder cases out of criminal court and having to try them. And so, of course, it was great experience. And it was a great, well, like I say, it was a great experience. It was challenging, and I had to learn a lot in a hurry. And so I was handling first-degree murder cases and rape cases and armed robbery cases on the court-appointed list. And so about that time, the other direction that my practice took is that there were a group of Catholic nuns that had come to Campbell County, around the Jellicoe area. And they were involved in working with the community, trying to help people that were in need up there to get back on their feet. And so they were involved in kind of economic development programs, health programs, lawyer, housing issues up there. And so they had a lawyer that had come up there as a volunteer, but he decided he couldn't do it anymore. And so through friends, they approached me and said, would you be interested in going up to Campbell County and being a lawyer and just being there? If anyone comes in that has a legal problem, you know, you can be there to help him. I said, sure, I'll do that. Because I was starting out and I still had a limited practice and not much. So for about the next 2 years, I went up there. There was a clinic, a medical clinic that used a mobile home up there in a place called White Oak, and that's in Campbell County. And one day a week it was empty on Tuesday, and so they said I could use that as my office. And so I started going up to Campbell County every Tuesday, and I would and the types of cases that really were popular, were coming along at that time, were black lung cases. There had been a federal law that was passed in 1970, the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act, that was designed to make the mines cleaner so the miners wouldn't be exposed to coal dust. But there was also another part of it where they awarded black lung benefits to someone that had been exposed to coal dust and was totally disabled, and they received benefits for them and their family for the rest of their lives. And so what really opened up there, which I never, would never imagine, was that I became a black lung lawyer. And so before it was over, I had many of those cases. And they were sort of like a Social Security case where, if they were turned down, then you would appeal the case, you appear before the administrative law judge, and you have to prove you have exposure, you have to prove you have the black lung, and you have to prove that you're totally disabled. And so those were cases that had to be tried before the administrative law judge. And so I did that. I handled many of those cases. And so that kind of opened up an area. So I always was leaning toward the criminal, but now here on the civil side, those types of cases. And that kind of opened up getting into workers' compensation cases too. And so that kind of led me down that path where I ended up. So, and I backed away from the criminal cases and then concentrated on work on the civil side.
Talk about the Knoxville bar in the early 70s. What do you remember? Well,
of course, I've mentioned my cousin John and Bob Child. It was in the 70s. It was cordial. It was helpful. I can remember a number of times. I remember Paul Parker, that was a longtime lawyer in this town with O'Neill Parker Williamson. And when I was trying to become more proficient in workers' compensation, I called Paul and I said, Paul, can we have lunch sometime together and you could give me, kind of educate me? And he was more than gracious to do that and helpful. And I had experiences like that along the way. I never had a mentor, and I miss that. I'm kind of envious of lawyers that start and have a mentor that teach them how to try lawsuits, so forth. I never had the benefit of that. I kind of learned the hard way of hits and misses and mistakes and so forth. But I did, anytime I felt like I needed some advice, I could go to people and ask them, and they were great to help me.
you became a trial lawyer, and in particular a respected insurance defense lawyer. How did you get there?
Okay. Well, when I was up next to my cousin's law firm from there, Sid Gilreath opened an office on Gage Street, and it was an association of lawyers, not a partnership. And he invited me and Archie Carpenter and Mike Rowland. And it was Gilreath, Carpenter, Rowland, and O'Connor, an association. And so I moved from the first place down to Sid's office for a couple of years. And I continued to do my plaintiffs-related work, black lung and workers' compensation and personal injury and things of that nature. And Archie and Meredith Bond, who was with Paul Parker's firm at that time, by the way, they decided they were going to start a partnership, and they asked if I'd like to join them, and I said yes, I would. And so in 1975, we all moved to the old Park National Bank building on Gay Street and started Bond, Carpenter, and O'Connor. And I was still doing my work. Meredith and Archie had come from a practice of insurance defense work, and little by little I was kind of pulled into that type of practice and started doing more and more of that. I always continued to do plaintiffs related work, but more than that I did more insurance defense work. And I found myself concentrating on workers' compensation. A number of the companies that I represented, they were looking for someone that did workers' compensation, and so that's what I did for many years. I continued to do other just general defense work and some plaintiffs work, but workers' compensation was my expertise, I guess you'd say.
At some point, your practice went from litigation to mediation.
Yes.
Talk about that.
About 1997, so I was about 65 years old at that time, or 66. Mediation was starting to become more and more popular. There were lawyers that were doing mediation on the side along with their practice. And I used mediators, in some of the cases that I was handling, and I liked what I saw. And I said, I think that I would like to do that. I was ready for a change. I mean, I'd done a general practice for many, many years. I liked mediation. And quite frankly, serving as a mediator was kind of the way I thought as a lawyer, as a problem solver. And so I said, well, I think this kind of fits the way I practice law, and it fits the way that I like to resolve legal issues and help parties resolve it. And so I went and became certified as a Rule 31, and then learned how to be a mediator and started incorporating the mediation in my regular practice. And I did that for about another 5 years, something like that. And then at that point I decided I would just be a mediator full time. And so for about the last 6 or 7 years of my practice, I was primarily a mediator and really didn't handle cases anymore. But really enjoyed the mediation a whole lot. Yeah.
You practiced law here in Knox County in East Tennessee for 48 years. What were the biggest changes that you have seen in the practice of law?
Well, I think mediation is the biggest one I saw. I guess there's some other lawyers that maybe were in other fields that saw other things, but as far as the kind of practice I had, whether it was plaintiffs or defense, personal injury type of work, things like that, pretty much remained the same. Of course, our bar has always been great about being friendly and helpful and cordial and civil and so forth, and I think it remained that way all along. But I think the mediation was the big thing that I saw as you saw more and more mediations taking place and fewer trials taking place. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I saw.
Are there any particular cases or legal experiences that you remember?
I was thinking about that. I've got a couple of cases that kind of come to mind. The first one was a first-degree murder case that I was assigned to handle. John Gill was the Assistant Attorney General, so he was prosecuting the case, and I was defending the case as a court-appointed lawyer. My client had stabbed her husband in the neck, and he had died. She said it was self-defense, but they charged her with first-degree murder. And I went to John and I said, John, is there anything we can talk about here to see if we can't resolve this short of a trial? And he said, no, we've decided that this is a first-degree murder case. We're not going to talk about anything any less than first-degree murder. And in fact, we're going to ask the jury to impose the death penalty on your client if she's found guilty. And so I had no room to do anything but defend the case. And so we defended the case. And hard-fought case. And in the end, the jury came back after about 3 or 4 days of trial. The jury came back and they were hung up. 11 people had voted to convict my client, but one person said that she could not. And so it was a hung jury. And after the hung jury and kind of some things that had developed during the trial that were benefiting my defendant client, you know, the Attorney General said, okay, we'll talk to you now. So that was one I'll never forget, and John Gill and I still laugh about that. There was a lot of colorful things that happened in that case. The other one is when I was doing workers' compensation work, a client came. His name was Russ Jose, and Russ Jose worked for a company called Equifax that did a lot of surveillance work, and so he was asked by his company to go out and try to do surveillance work over and over on different people that had made claims. And he said it was so highly stressful that it caused him to have a nervous breakdown. And so he had lost his job with the company because he couldn't work anymore because of his psychological condition. And so I filed a lawsuit making a claim for workers' compensation based upon a psychological injury. Unfortunately, I did not win the case, but that case was the case that developed the law on what proof must be shown in order to have a psychological injury be a compensable injury under the workers' compensation. And so I'm proud of that case, that the law was established, that we all know what kind of proof is necessary in that type of case.
If you were giving advice to a new lawyer, what would you tell him or her?
Well, first off, I would tell them if you're going to practice with some other people, make sure that you all get along and that you can work together. And secondly, be sure and do something that you really enjoy doing and something that you think is meaningful. Want to come to work every day feeling like you're going to make a difference in someone's life, not just going through the motions of starting at 1 and finishing at 10 and no meaning to it. So doing something that's meaningful and doing something that makes you want to get up and go to work every day.
Being a lawyer is stressful. You always seem to be able to balance work and life outside of the office. How did you do that?
Well, several ways. I've always loved sports, and I've always kept playing sports all along. I play a lot of tennis. I played golf. I do some hiking. So I've always made that a part of my life as kind of a stress reducer. I've always done things with my family, done things with my boys, and made sure I had time for all of their events, and if it meant that I had to get up early or work late at night so I could be freed up during the day to attend one of their activities or sporting events, then I always made sure that I did that, and that's how I managed it.
You were always known as both an excellent lawyer but also a gentleman. In today's practice, do you think that is still possible?
I do. I don't see why it can't be. You know, I was up against many lawyers that wanted to play a little tougher and a little harder. But I think if you're just straight up and you do it in a professional sort of way, you can do it in a civil sort of way and be just as effective as someone that might want to be more flamboyant about it. But the lawyers that I know are still gentlemen, and I can't think of any lawyers that I did not trust, quite frankly.
What did you enjoy most about your legal career?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, it exposed me to a lot of different people. I'm a people person. I enjoy people. I enjoy getting to know them and know about them. And so that was true of fellow lawyers as well as clients and other people. So I enjoyed that part. And the other part is practicing law is a real learning profession. And so, if it might be you learn something about the business world, you learn something about accounting, you learn something about manufacturing, how machines work, or if it malfunctioned, why it malfunctioned, products liability, just the different types of business and work that people do out there that I may never have been exposed to. I got to learn about all of those through those clients that I made over the years.
If there were one or two things that you would change about your career, what would they be?
Well, I mentioned the mentor part. I wish I'd had a mentor. I like the idea that I had the freedom as a private practitioner and then as a partner to partnership to kind of do my thing, but at the same time, I wish that I'd had that mentor somewhere along the line that had taught me early on, how to practice and how to be an effective litigator and so forth. And I learned it, but I had to learn it on my own as opposed through someone that really had the knowledge and the experience. So,
anything else you would change?
No, I love to work. I kept working. In fact, I still do a little bit of work. I do a little mediation, but for the most part, I worked until I was about 76 years old. And so I know a lot of people dream about working hard and retiring when they're 62 or 65. I never had that. I always liked to work. I enjoyed the work, and glad I had the opportunity to do it. So. And I had mediation, which was the thing that I continued to do, which I love doing.
That leads me into my next question. How did you know when it was time to retire?
I just took it year after year, and I just told myself as long as I enjoy it and I want to do it and I have something to do, then I will keep doing it. And so, as the years went on, I didn't run out of energy. I still like to do what I was doing, but a couple of years ago, next year would be my 50th year of practicing law, and so I finally decided, well, a couple of years ago, maybe it is time to just kind of hang it up. I'm still active in a lot of things
right now. That was what I was going to ask you. What are you doing now?
Well, of course, like I said, I still love my sports. I still play tennis and golf, do some hiking. We have 5 children. We have 9 grandchildren. We do a lot of things with them. I'm on several boards, and I'm in different organizations, nonprofit, volunteer work that I still do. So I'm plenty busy and every day, and I read a lot. So I'm just enjoying all those things.
Is there anything else that you wish that I had asked you and you would like to tell us?
I think I've covered the covered the highlights of. I think were meaningful as I went along in my years.
One final question. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, like most people, I'd like to be considered fair. I'd like to be considered honest, a hard worker, someone that contributed professionally to the betterment of society, where you try to reach reasonable and fair results in, in different types of disputes that people have. And I think I've done those things, and I hope I'm remembered for those things.
I think you will be. Greg, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.